And we're back, focusing on the booze in Bond's books. Ian Fleming wrote Bond as a sophisticated agent. He knows his history, and he knows his alcohol. He's a true connoisseur. So ultimately, if you want to be like Bond, you need to watch this video series to understand the background of the booze, just as Bond does. In part 1, we explored Casino Royale and Live and Let Die. So let's continue the literary booze cruise on PCZ TV, shall we? Today's episode, Bond's Booze in the Books. Let's examine the Fleming Bond novel by novel. Of course, we will reference the core material, his books, as part of this. Now, clarification based on a question on the last video. What did I mean by the figures of drinks? Okay, this will get into some statistically gruesome details, so I'll put it at the end of the video for those statisticians so we can debate it like good anoraks. Oh, I've also found some errors in the last video and have provided updated information in this video, and undoubtedly some more errors will be pointed out in this video, which I'll correct in a future video. As always, a word of warning, do not try to drink along with Bond through this video. The man can certainly put it away. It's 1955 and Moonraker. A very different story in the novel versus the movie starring Roger Moore. I counted 7 drinking sessions in this novel, which involve champagne, vodka, whiskey, and wine. Kind of sounds like a country song, but as usual, I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong. In Chapter 3, Bond has half a carafe of white Bordeaux with his meal. White Bordeaux, or Bordeaux Blanc, is as you might expect from the Bordeaux region of France. The interesting bit is that Bordeaux is actually famous more for its red wine than its white wine. And now we begin my bad French pronunciation. Please forgive me. The Heart and Crew website describes Bordeaux Blanc as a blend of Semillon, Sauvignon Blanc, and sometimes a bit of Muscadel. So Semillon is the most planted white grape in the region. It's known for its rich honey-textured. Sauvignon Blanc, I'm sure everyone's heard of that one, is the region's second most planted white variety. And white Bordeaux has 2 major styles that are divided into serious and less serious. The serious styles tend to come from unpronounceable regions. The less serious styles, and by serious I'm sure they mean expensive, usually come from Entre-deux-Mers. The strongest claim of white Bordeaux is its ability to be a jack-of-all-trades of wine. Now, we don't know which specific one Bond was consuming, but I'm going to guess it's the more serious version. In Chapter 4, Bond is hanging out with M, if you can call it that. M opts for a whiskey soda and Bond resorts to his standard dry vodka martini. I covered vodka martinis in the previous video, so if you need a refresher, go back and watch the first video. A fun note is that M disapproved. "Rot gut," commented M as the waiter went away. Interesting exchange, and by the way, Fleming spells whiskey without the E. In the last video I talked about Scotch and soda, but American and Irish liquor producers and copy editors tend to favor the spelling with the E, while Scottish, Canadian, and Japanese producers tend to favor the spelling without the E. The difference always carries on in the plural for those anoraks out there. So for whiskey, the plural is whiskeys with an E. Based on the spelling, I'm guessing M is drinking a Scotch whiskey. Well, this is an interesting one. Unless I'm very much mistaken, this is the first time Fleming calls out vodka by brand name. So let's break down Chapter 5 in more detail, shall we? Earlier, M derided vodka as rotgut, but now he instructs the sommelier to provide some specific brands, and this is Wolfschmidt, The Riga area is in Latvia. Well, that makes sense given that Wolfschmidt can trace its origins back to Latvia. But pre-war? Wolfschmidt, that's hard to say, vodka has been made in the U.S. since 1847. It's actually claimed on their website to be the first vodka introduced to the U.S. It was originally made in Latvia, then Holland, and then went to the U.S. So Wolfschmidt vodka, by the way, is now owned by Jim Beam Brands, and we'll see this coincidence later, and is produced in the U.S., as I said, since 1847. So when he talks about pre-war, what war is referring to? The U.S. Civil War? Well, this is confusing to me. I don't know. By the way, this vodka is not now known to be a top-shelf premium liquor. Anthony Bourdain joked that they would refill the top-shelf vodkas with some of the Wolfschmidt. It's also interesting that Fleming called this one out by name. Fleming, through James Bond, has probably been the best global salesman of vodka, but, and I'm going on a limb here, not sure Fleming was well-versed in premium vodkas. Either that or Wolfschmidt used to be a premium vodka, and, alas, it is no more. So the next up is the questionable thing, the pepper theory. The pepper theory goes that one need only add some black pepper to vodka to improve the taste and take out the impurities. So in Chapter 5, Bond and M go back and forth on this. So let's unpeel this onion. The pepper is allegedly added to address fusel oil, which apparently was common in Russian vodka. Fusel? I'm not sure how to say it. Is German for bad liquor. So fusel oils are a mixture of several alcohols, and it's a byproduct of fermentation. It's sort of like impurity. They're allegedly the cause of hangovers. Of course, he would learn this from the Russians, as their vodka is shite. He should have been drinking Polish vodka, the best in the world, where one doesn't need to filter out impurities. But I digress. So the question is, does the pepper really make a difference and filter out the impurities? The James Bond dossier website speculates that Fleming had learned the trick when he was in Moscow before the war. The pepper sinks to the bottom, taking with it any of the impurities. But I regret to bust this myth. The main reason Russians add pepper is to add some flavor. Vodka is, after all, a fairly neutral spirit. So, sorry, let's just jump back to M ordering a bit. And we're back to Bordeaux. But this time, it's red. Claret is a British term used unofficially in reference to red Bordeaux wines. The red wines of Bordeaux are a blend, mainly based on Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. So it's also a claret that is a protected name under the EU appellation law. So to understand the appellation law, see last video's section on champagne to understand the rules. M orders half a bottle, the Mouton Rothschild 34. Now get to it, Grimley! Okay, these French names are killing me, but some history about Mouton Rothschild via FlemingsBond.com. Obviously, these are premium French wines. The Chateau Mouton Rothschild vineyard is planted with the varieties typical of the region, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, and Petit Verdot. While the blend, it's the Cabernet Sauvignon that always predominates. The average age of the vines is around 44 years, so these are premium wines indeed. Not to be outdone. While there, Bond also consumes champagne. Champagne? Champagne? Again, for a more in-depth view of champagne, please see the last video. But with that being said, Fleming does call out some brands. The first is when M recalls Bond's penchant for Taittinger. Well done, M. Then Fleming drops Dom Perignon, in particular the 46. Well, Dom Perignon. It's named after a Benedictine monk from the late 1600s, and per Wikipedia, which never lies, while he was an important quality pioneer for champagne, he did not discover the champagne method for making sparkling wines, as some have claimed. Dom Perignon is always a vintage champagne, meaning that all grapes used to make the wine were harvested in the same year. The wine is not made in weak years, so if the quality of the harvest isn't good, no wine, no champagne. Go figure. Oh, by the way, it's a lovely place to visit, and if you find yourself in that part of the world, I would highly encourage it. It's a gorgeous part of France, and believe it or not, people are actually friendly in France. Well, they're friendly outside Paris. I would also argue that Dom Perignon is perhaps the most famous of all the champagne producers in the world. Next up on the hit parade, brandy. Brandy, you're a fine girl. Okay, sorry. M beckoned to a passing waiter. A coffee in the club, brandy. Okay. Cheating time. Goldfinger, the movie reference. This is a classic scene. The scene begins midway in their post-dinner libation. As the butler dispenses cigars, the colonel offers 007 M more of his rather disappointing brandy. Well, M, of course, is like, what's wrong with it? Bond, being the connoisseur that we have already identified, has a killer response. I'd say it was a 30-year-old Finet and definitely blended, sir. That's so awesome. What a great scene. That's classic. Well, the origins of brandy are tied into the development of distillation. While the process was known in classical times, it was not used for significant beverage production until the 15th century. Brandy is a liquor produced by distilling wine. Brandy generally contains 35 to 60% alcohol and is typically consumed as an after-dinner digestif. Some brandies are aged in wooden casks, others are colored, other has caramel coloring, some are produced by a combination of aging and coloring. Typical. There's a whole bunch of varieties across the winemaking world. But they do have several segments. One of the most renowned are cognac. And this variety M specifically calls out. Now, I went to the Remy Martin website to help clarify some of my cognac and brandy confusion. So cognac is always made with grapes and has a very specific distillation and blending process. And it's in a small protected area, aka appellation, of France. It is a brandy, but not all brandies are cognac. So I think I need a Venn diagram to understand all this, but here's where I learned something else about brandy or cognac. It has a traditional age grading system. Although its use is really unregulated outside cognac, cognac sticks to these indicators and they can be found on the label. Who knew? So, sorry, Remy Martin, but M leads into his old favorite. Of course, it's Bordeaux, and of course, it's all Rothschild's product. By the way, free is my favorite price, so I'm totally on board with them. Oh, back to Rothschild's. In the French branch of the Rothschild family, and are there others? I mean, I took this from their website. The traditional wine dates back to 1868 with the purchase of Chateau Lafite by James de Rothschild. So there are a whole bunch of descendants and a whole bunch of relatives, and they're all making wine and cognac. And by the way, Lafite comes from the term lahit, meaning small hill. So ultimately, my takeaway from all of this is that Fleming is a big fan of the Bordeaux region of France. Outside the Champagne region, this is the one he heads to for his other wine and brandy needs. Did he visit there a lot, I wonder? Perhaps someone who knows Fleming's history better than I, and that wouldn't be hard to do, could tell me. Please leave a comment below. Moving on. Chapter 10. Whiskey soda. In this case, it's another name drop. It's black and white Scotch. Black and white was first made in 1879, initially by a different name, Buchanan's Blend, And then House of Commons, after the British House of Commons, and its nickname was Black and White, referring to the label. Eventually that became so popular they just decided to adopt it as the official brand name. The brand's motif features a black Scottish Terrier and a white Western Highland White Terrier. Whew. Was conceived by James Buchanan himself during the 1890s. And in Chapter 9, jumping around slightly, another martini. And usually I wouldn't mention it, but now it comes even with its own shaker. That's cool. That's class, even if it is served by Krebs. So let's change location. It's a different chapter, a different location. And in Chapter 29, Bond is with his martini again. It's a bittersweet ending to the book. Spoiler alert, Bond does not end up with the bird, but it's a great visual for a James Bond rendezvous. And so we move on to Diamonds Are Forever. Is it just me, or does everyone sing the song when they read the book titles? No? Not me neither. I don't do it. In this book, Bond ups his drinking. In this case, almost 3 times as much. So the brew's breakdown shows a fairly even divide between vodka-based products and bourbon-based products. And this is probably a reflection of Fleming wanting Bond to go local with his drinks. And speaking of drinking, we start with Bond on a plane, drinking. A BOAC Monarch, to be precise. Piston-engine airliners were painfully slow. But don't forget, this was before the first successful jet airliners were in large-scale service. The de Havilland Comet jet airliner was just entering service when Bond was writing this, and also they were experiencing some significant issues, leading to the loss of some planes, but I digress. A journey from London to New York on a piston-engine plane could take up to 17 hours and required a refueling stop in Shannon, Ireland, before crossing the Atlantic. The flight in question is in Chapter 6, and Bond, of course, indulges in champagne, type unknown, with his meal, but then he calls out something new, something different, and something unique to, at the time, Shannon, Ireland, an Irish coffee. Now, there are many tales about the Irish coffee's origins. The one I like best is the one attributed to John Sheridan, the head chef of the restaurant at the Foynes Flying Boat Terminal in County Limerick in the early 40s. The museum at Foynes even has a website dedicated to this, to the Irish coffee. It's brilliant. And here's where it gets even funner, more fun. The drink was later made famous, not in Ireland, but in San Francisco, by columnist Stanton de la Plaine, who frequented the Buena Vista Cafe in San Francisco during the 50s. And he had one when he was in Ireland, and he and the bar's owner attempted to recreate the drink, but they couldn't quite get it right, so they decided the easiest thing to do is just to hire Joe Sheridan. On a busy day, this bar can serve more than 2,000 Irish coffees. So if you're planning to make one, well, you can't go wrong with the original recipe. And I would not recommend pouring your Jameson Irish whiskey from 2 feet above the glass like they do at the Buena Vista. Surprise, surprise, surprise. In Chapter 8, Bond's ordering another medium dry martini. Now, here's a correction to the previous video. On another reading, and that's why we do this, isn't it? As a hobby. Fleming does mention the vermouth, mea culpa. So from FlemingsBond.com, Cresta Blanca was one of California's most historic wineries, founded in 1882. In 1889, a white wine won the grand prize at the Paris Exposition, the first time a California wine won a competition in France. So, with that victory, California wine looked much better, much stronger. As we know today, it's a huge industry. As a bonus, they also made vermouth, which is what Felix ordered. Alas, it closed in 1965. The location is now a historical landmark, but sorry, James and James Bond fans, we've missed out on the best vermouth. And that sort of sucks, to be honest with you. And we move to chapter 9, and Bond has another martini. Okay. Perhaps I seriously underplayed how much he drinks these things, but I'll get to my methodology later. And we quickly move on to other drinks. Bond orders a Vive Clicquot? Clicquot? Pink champagne. Boy, my French is horrible. I'm sorry. And of course, we're back to the Champagne region of France and my poor pronunciation. So, Madame Clicquot, the Grande Dame of Champagne, born in 1777, widowed at 27, and became one of the first modern female entrepreneurs. In an era when women were excluded from the business world, she dared to assume the head of a company. And in addition, she had many innovations and firsts in the production of champagne. The first known vintage, the invention of the riddling table, the first known blend of rosé champagne. 3 innovations that revolutionized champagne making. Madame Clicquot made her name into a brand of excellence and earned herself the nickname of La Grande Dame of Champagne. And so we move from the height of sophistication to the nouveau riche. Oh, America, it hurts so much. But later in that same chapter, they're drinking a stinger. What the heck is a stinger? Fleming's on a Bordeaux high, he's on a champagne high, and he drops down to a stinger? Well, the stinger is a pre-Prohibition era drink composed mainly of cognac and white crème de menthe. The cocktail is allegedly sweet, strong, and minty. And it sounds totally like mouthwash to me. Now, as usual, the exact origins of the stinger are murky, but it appeared in print at least as far back as 1914. It's most famously associated with Reginald Vanderbilt, yes, of the Vanderbilts, who was fond of serving them to his guests. Vanderbilt's taste for the stinger solidified it as a high society drink, and for decades the drink was associated with the upper class. It even appeared in the 1956 movie High Society with Frank Sinatra and Bing Crosby. The stinger remained popular in the US until about the 70s, when people suddenly realized it tasted like shit. So the stinger recipes vary in proportion, some drinkers preferring the drier version, and others particularly calling for a stronger version, and try it if you dare. Moving on a bit, and ignoring vodka martinis, Bond then drinks a beer. This is not common for James Bond. He doesn't drink a lot of beer. Miller High Life. Miller Brewing was founded in 1855 after his emigration from Germany in 1854, and he brought with himself a unique brewer's yeast. They changed their name to Miller Brewing Company, and the enterprise remained in the family until 1966. Miller High Life itself, it's a Pilsner-style beer. Makes sense because Miller is from Germany. Introduced in 1903, it's its oldest brand, and is noted for its high level of carbonation, like champagne, leading to its longtime slogan, the champagne of beers. Now, believe it or not, it was one of the premier high-end beers in the US for many years. High Life bottles themselves were designed to mimic a champagne bottle, and they featured a bright gold label made of clear glass, has a tapered neck like a champagne bottle. So, okay, not gonna lie, it tastes like shit. Sure, it was high-end when Americans had no taste, but since the advent of craft brewing, Americans have discovered other beer styles besides weak pilsners. Sure, some of these may be overhopped IPAs, but at least they're drinking the swill or worse Bud Light. The reality is people should just buy Belgian beer. They make the best beers in the world. Get a good Trappist, or feel free to try the best beer in the world, Orval. Avoid the watered-down, mass-produced McBeers made in America, I beg you.
I think you got the point.
Chapter 11, Bond is introduced to bourbon and bourbon drinks. Felix tells him it's fashionable in racing circles. Ha 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 ha, bourbon. Quite the drink for Bond. This will become his drink theme during this book and his American go-to liquor. We'll see it again in Chapter 12 as Bond dips in the bourbon, and again in Chapter 14. But for now, a moment of bourbon history. Bourbon is a type of barrel-aged American whiskey made primarily from corn. The name derives from the French Bourbon dynasty, although the precise source of information and inspiration is uncertain. There are too many theories to recount here, but to answer your question, yes, it's a type of whiskey, but it's very different from its European cousins. Now, bourbon is serious business. It was recognized in 1964 by the U.S. Congress as a distinctive product of the United States. Bourbon sold in the U.S. must be produced in the country from at least 51% corn and stored in new containers of charred oak. Now, this is very different from Scottish whiskey in the use of new barrels. Bourbon has been distilled since the 18th century. Although bourbon may be made anywhere in the United States, it's strongly associated with the American South in general and with Kentucky in particular. And as I said earlier, like all good liquor history, the past origins are very murky indeed. Distilling was most likely brought to the present-day area of Kentucky in the late 18th century by the Scots-Irish and some other settlers probably. But they began to farm the area in earnest. The origin of bourbon as a distinct form of whiskey is not well documented, so you can imagine there are many conflicting legends and claims, but newspaper articles in the area started referencing bourbon and Kentucky as far back as 1824. So let's get back to Mr. Bond. Bond drinks it in old-fashioned, which we covered in the video series in part 1. On the rocks, and as we saw, with branch water. Branch water. You mean water that falls from branches or comes from the branch of some famous river? What the heck is branch water? Well, it's a southern thing. Branch water, also called branch, is a water from a natural stream. Now, frankly, I agree with Bond. I think it's just plain water. It's just tap water or bottled flat water. Much of the bottled water in the U.S. alleges to come from the source of springs, so in reality it's probably just pulled off the garden hose up in the mountains, but who knows? Of course, it does sound pretty cool. You gotta love drinks. Drinks have some really cool images in their names. And let's pop back to chapter 17 for a second and bourbon. We have Fleming name drop a brand. Old Grandad was created in 1840. The whiskey had been in production since that time with several different changes of ownership. What I love best is during Prohibition, the company produced medicinal whiskey for sick, blind, and lame patients. That deaf, dumb, and blind kid. In 1987, the company was sold to the Jim Beam Group. In a strange twist of fate that often happens, Jim Beam, the new parent company, also employed a certain Scottish actor to endorse their products. In any case, Diamond ends as Bond drinks some more bourbons, some more champagne, and pretty much is sent to the Betty Ford Clinic after this mission. And as the book and this video closes. So wow, I'm not going to lie, there was a lot of booze in the books. And we've only made it through 4, much more than I remember. Finally, as promised, a look at the statistics and methodology. So based on the comments in the last video, I revised the analysis. I am now counting drink sessions. Before I just measured by category. Therefore, if a vodka was martini was mentioned anywhere in the book, it was counted 1. Well, adopting a new statistical method will lead to a more accurate measurement of Bond preferences. Now, to be fair, this new method does not count the number of drinks consumed in each session. Why? Again, accuracy. Because there's no way of knowing how much of the champagne, for instance, a Bond drank versus his companion. They may have ordered a bottle and maybe he consumed 99% of it. No way of knowing. I could have divided the bottle into two-person consumption, but I suspect Bond probably drank more than his counterpart. But who knows? That's just an estimate. So I thought drinking sessions, where I defined by a distinct event at which he drinks and what he drinks, would be more accurate. So he may have 2 dry martinis at dinner, but I only count that as one drinking session. Is that fair? Anoraks out there may also panic that I separate out whiskey and bourbon. Yes, I'm aware, as I mentioned earlier, that bourbon's a whiskey, but it's a different style. Therefore, based on the U.S. Congress, I decided to break them out. Okay, then you're going to ask, well, why do I put all wines under the wine category where a red is different than a white, which is different from a pink? And no reason except I don't drink wine and I drink whiskey. So now that I've upset a great many of you, feel free to shake your martini at me and write a strongly worded comment below. Thus ends part 2. Crikey, Bond drinks a lot. I thought, a video or 2 I'll cover it, but no. Fleming has him imbibe in all sorts of varieties. Pretty cool, actually, but I'm not going to lie. At the rate Bond drinks different varieties of booze, this will be a multi-parter to finish his consumption in the books. And these are just the books. Well, we just went through brandy, Bordeaux, bourbon, Branchwater, and some other B's in the books. Let's see where the next Bond video takes us in this series. If you've been watching this far, I thank you. Bye!